you're still in it to win it for the 2020 fantasy football season, you're thinking playoffs. Fantasy playoffs are just around the corner, and you need to prepare at the running back position, which has been more volatile than ever this year. Who can you really trust to help you win that championship down the stretch? I took a look at the schedules from weeks 14 through 16 to help you decide who are the top running backs in the league. So let me count down my top 10 running backs for the rest of the season of the fantasy playoffs in 2020. And let's get started with number 10, a guy that we haven't seen play for a long time, but he should be back starting in week 13. That's Austin Ekeler. Forgot about him. He was drafted really high in a lot of leagues, and just very disappointing that he's been out since week 4. But he should be back. All signs point to a week 13 return. And you know what? He is somebody you should have locked in your lineup no matter what. He was averaging almost 100 yards total per game. And that was before Justin Herbert came in as a starting quarterback and took over. And you've seen how effective the offense has been with him. So you know that they'll move the ball. Ekeler will get a ton of opportunities both on the ground and through the air. As far as the schedule, the only opponent that the Chargers have down the stretch with a winning record is the Raiders, and that team just happens to allow the 4th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. Ekeler is a guy who's going to bring a massively high floor because of his pass catching ability, and with all the injuries they've had in the backfield and ineffectiveness of guys like Joshua Kelly, Ekeler is bound to be a bell cow there. Number 9, this was a tough choice, honestly, because I want to give a nod to the rookie in Washington, Antonio Gibson, but I had to go with Miles Sanders because, well, we've seen what he can do, averaging 5.7 yards per carry on the season. That in itself is impressive. He hasn't produced any massively big games lately, but some tough road contests last couple of weeks. Now, down the stretch, he'll face teams like New Orleans, which is a fairly good run defense, but then Arizona, and then best of all against Dallas in week 16. That'll be a crucial division matchup that you know they're going to lean on Sanders on to win. And of course, Dallas's defense is just not very good. I wouldn't worry about keeping him out of the top 10 because, well, we've seen what he can do. He really doesn't depend on volume. He doesn't need 20 plus carries. He doesn't get it because he's so effective with the touches he does get. Again, Philadelphia is probably going to ride him down the stretch. You've got to keep him locked in. Got him at number 9 for the rest of the season. Talk about number 8, James Robinson. What a great pick. Well, he wasn't even drafted in most leagues. He was a waiver wire pickup, and he's been a fantasy savior off the waiver wire. And I have him here because, well, he's getting the volume. He still owns that backfield, even with guys that were preseason sleepers like Divine Ozebo coming back. Doesn't matter. Robinson owns his backfield, and volume does count. Also showing up, the fact that he hasn't missed a game. He's one of the more reliable running backs, even though it's on a bad team. You figure that whether it's Mike Glennon or Gardner Minshew or Jake Luton or whoever at quarterback, it doesn't matter. Robinson is going to get the touches. He's going to get the red zone work, and he's going to be there every game, and that matters. Not a wonderful schedule. Can't have him higher just because, well, Tennessee in week 14, that's a nice matchup, but then gets the Bears and the Ravens. So can't quite put him higher than 8. But again, it's nice to have a locked in RB1 like him that you can count on. At number 7, speaking of volume, talk about Josh Jacobs. He is 3rd in the league in rush attempts. That matters. Also, scoring 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games. This running game is finally getting going. We see the Raiders as a whole being more effective on offense, and they are doing the smart thing, and that's leaning more on their ground game with guys like Jacobs. So as far as week 14 through 16, the schedule, we got the Chargers is the plus matchup, kind of sandwiched in between 2 really tough ones, which is the Colts in week 14 and the Dolphins in week 16. If that matchup, those 3 matchups were better, I would have him a little bit higher. But again, Jacobs is a guy that you can kind of set and forget and not worry too much about because, again, they're going to lean on him. And he's shown he can produce points even in negative matchups. Number 6, Nick Chubb. Again, pretty much matchup proof. He's shown that it really doesn't matter. He can break off long runs anytime. And Cleveland is definitely leaning on him offensively. Back-to-back 100-yard games ever since coming back from injury. Missed a lot of time. You can imagine what he would have done for fantasy teams had he been healthy all year. He's got 5 touchdowns in the 6 games he has played, and I wouldn't worry too much about Hunt stealing those goal line carries like he did the other day. It's not going to happen every single game. Okay, now as far as the schedule, it gets pretty nice. The Ravens are semi-tough, then the Giants, but the Jets in week 16, I mean, that's really an opportunity for him to be a league winner if you make it that far to the championship game. At number 5, I'm going to go with Aaron Jones. I know it's been a little bit disappointing for him, banged up a little bit with that calf injury, but also just not having those big rushing games like we're used to for Aaron Jones. But he is one player who does benefit from the schedule, which is why I have him higher than a couple of the names I just mentioned. He gets Detroit, Carolina, and Tennessee in weeks 14, 15, 16. All of those are bottom 7 run defenses in terms of fantasy points given up to the running back. You can't ask for more. And again, Green Bay is a team that's not only in the hunt to win their division, but hoping for a high seed in the playoffs. They're going to rely on him. Of course, they have Aaron Rodgers, so they don't really have to rely on the run game, but Aaron Jones is also one of those dual threat backs, so you don't have to worry too much about game script because he'll catch some passes too. With that schedule, you can't deny Jones has to be a top 5 running back. Number 4, Alvin Kamara, slightly low for him. You'd think, should be a top 3 back? Well, here's the concern, and it's not really so much schedule to him. It's this new look Saints offense with Taysom Hill at quarterback. Kamara, for the first time in his career, didn't catch a pass. And we already know Taysom Hill, right? He's going to run the ball when he gets near the goal line. That's part of the benefit of having him in instead of Drew Brees. He's going to vulture some of those touchdowns, even though Kamara did score a touchdown on the ground with Hill at quarterback for that first matchup. Hill's going to take away some of those goal line carries, some of those touchdowns, and Kamara, if he's not going to be an elite receiver, well, that pretty much kills his value because that's what he is. He's a high-end receiver who plays running back. Now, Kamara, you cannot keep him out of the top 5 because, well, he's Alvin Kamara. Yes, he will score touchdowns even with Hill doing what he does, and I don't expect him to not catch any passes going forward. But again, you have to be a little concerned. But again, it's Alvin Kamara. He's still a top 5 player. Number 3, also might be surprised to see Dalvin Cook, who arguably has been this year's fantasy MVP at running back at least. Number 3, the difference is, again, the schedule here not favorable for him. And even though it doesn't really matter because you're going to start him every week, no matter what, don't even think about it. But why is he not number 1 or 2? Well, he gets Tampa Bay, who had, before last week, the top-ranked rush defense in the league. That's week 14, and then gets the Saints week 16. Besides the fact that they have a tough rush defense, also might not be favorable game script for them to run the ball. So Dalvin Cook might not have his best performances down the stretch. Would be pretty disappointing, to say the least, if you've been riding him to the playoffs. So I would say temper expectations a little bit. But again, number 3 through the fantasy playoffs, that's still not a bad spot to be. My number 2 running back is going to be Derrick Henry. We know this team will ride him through the rest of the season, just as they've done all season. And let me tell you the schedule now. Week 14 gets Jacksonville. Say no more. Week 15, Detroit. Ray talked about them. They are actually the worst ranked rush defense as of right now. And Green Bay in week 16. That sounds like it might be a negative matchup, but again, with Derrick Henry, number 1, it doesn't really matter, but also number 2, Green Bay has been one of the worst run defenses. Also, it couldn't be better for Derrick Henry owners. You know that this is absolutely 3 smash spots in a row. He's my number 2 pick only because number 1, it's Christian McCaffrey. If Christian McCaffrey plays, he's number 1. There's no question to ask. And the good news is, even if he doesn't suit up for week 12, he's been wearing that red non-contact jersey. He is practicing, gets the bye in week 13, which actually will work out to your benefit if you can make it to the playoffs with him on your bench. In week 14, he'll be back. He'll be rested. And then he is the number 1 player. There is no question. He was the number 1 pick in fantasy for a reason. And you've seen what he's done during the few games that he has played this year. He's been the number 1 player. So if you manage to get this far with McCaffrey, you should be happy. You'll have him back just in time for the fantasy playoffs. He's the number 1 running back and, in fact, the number 1 player in all of fantasy throughout the fantasy playoffs. All right, that's my top 10 running backs. If you want to catch the wide receiver episode, also check that out. Talk about the top 10 wide receivers for the fantasy playoffs. This will be very important to pick the right players to help you win. Hopefully you have at least 1 or 2 of these guys on your roster. All right, guys, good luck the rest of the season.